Welcome to this episode of the Wave of Women. My name is Catalina, and I'm here with,
Alexis.
Carla.
Samantha.
and today we'll be discussing Agnes Varda and her film Le Bonheur. But that translates to the happiness in English, and we will be breaking down her film with her use of symbolism, imagery, portrayal of women, and her use of new wave modernist technique to portray visual irony.
Yes. I guess like for starters, before we discuss the filmmakers of the movement or era, we need to understand what is New Wave modernism. And so of course I Googled it and it told me that it's a movement characterized by its rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions in favor of experimentation and personal expression. When we think of New Wave modernism, it is something that has an increased focus on personal experience, a greater interest in subjective experience, and more emphasis on social issues. Um, Basically, like the success of the early New Wave had opened the gates for a generation of unknown directors to break through into what we had previously been a very closed industry. So I'm guessing like an industry without a lot of women. Films are now being made by young people for young people and starring young people. So it's hard for me not to think that New Wave modernism had more of a leftist approach to storytelling, which makes sense because the film we're talking about is Le Bonheur, Happiness. But with that being said, I did also look up the general directors of the era, and there was a lot of men, and some of them were Louis Malle, I'm going to butcher these names, Claude Chabrol, Francois Truffaut, Alan Resnais, and of course, our girl, Agnes Varda. I actually Googled her to get more information about her in general and like looked at her readings. And it told me that she was the most celebrated female director to be associated with the new wave, which is pretty tight. Yeah. I also wanted to give a brief biography about Agnes Varda, since we will be talking about her and her work. And she was born in May of 1928. And if she was born today, Catalina would tell her that she's a Gemini. She was an accomplished photographer before she turned to cinema in 1955 and directed the movie La Pointe Courte, which anticipated the production methods and aesthetics of the coming new wave. Then later became a leading member of the movement with the international success of Cleo from 5 to 7 in 1962. And of course, later, La Bonheur, aka Happiness, came out, and more years later, here we are talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you pointed out how Agnes Varda was kind of a very important point and important person in her time. As you mentioned, she was one of the few women who was actually voicing her opinions and putting a new voice out there besides the usual male-led one. I know some of her works are really recognized even to this day, and even us watching that film, her film Le Bonheur, years later, I think it's incredible, like the impact it still carries. I can only imagine the impact it had in 1965 when it originally came out.
I know. Can you imagine being like a young girl during that time and seeing some of her films? Like, I know there was a general uproar about like critiquing her work in general, but I would be like, thank God, Agnes, you saved us if I was that age.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, like you mentioned, some of the directors from that back then, and I've definitely seen their works constantly throughout the years. And it's incredible that we didn't really get exposed to her until now. But I think it was a much needed point of view because she does bring in like a very feminist point of view that although other genres have tried to portray with like their own stories that relating to mothers and daughters, I think it's just important to like the way she uses the irony, the visual irony in her films to deliver that message where it's almost missed, especially in La Bonniere when I think we can all agree while watching it, we were infuriated because we quite didn't quite understand if her message was to portray what should be the standard for a family, or just do the exact opposite and show us how it should not be, even though appears normal and most of society deems it acceptable.
Exactly. You actually made a really good point about visual irony in her film, because if we're talking about the technical aspect of La Bonheur, Happiness, Um, we can't talk about the film without talking about the color and imagery of the whole story and how it ties into the narrative. I remember like I think it was like the second week of class we watched this film, and on the lecture, the professor showed us like a series of photos attached to the film itself, and it was a picture of Francois and Emily, and they were standing like across each other in a room. And I think there was like a table in between them, and there was like this grandeur like vase of flowers, and it was like beautiful flowers, and there was a lot of color and imagery in the picture. I think Emily was wearing like a bright purple coat, and I remember he asked like, "What do you think the film is about?" And the other photo was him, Francois, with the two children in nature on a bright sunny day. And the imagery was so bright and colorful, but I think I said like I think it's about divorce. And I wanted to say more. I wanted to be like death, but I didn't want to be like a Debbie Downer. But I like how she ties in this use of visual irony to give us a movie that appears to be so upbeat and happy, like the title is, but the narrative is completely different. So we can't talk about the film without talking about the visual irony, and every scene has that visual irony. So I thought that was so fascinating as well, like you said.
Yeah, like in regards to that, I think it's really great how she was only like not only able to deliver something that was beautiful, it's like to look at, but it carried so much significance. Like you mentioned the flower vase, and I think that's something that throughout the film it's repeated. In a lot of the situations, you'll see beautiful flowers like surrounding them in nature, just to create that sense that they are this dynamic nuclear family. And and in the image that you described, it's exactly like you said. The flower, this beautiful flower arrangement, is centered in between them, and instead of being like a picture happy moment that you think it is, it really just foreshadows what's to come. And then every time you see flowers, you're reminded that something isn't right within the film. And I think that's a great way of storytelling.
I agree. Like you said, I think that color is kind of used as a blanket to almost hide like the hidden narrative of impending doom that occurs in both the scenes shown in the lecture. Um, yeah. Also, I was like looking at the lecture again and the picture of them standing between the table. And there's like a TikTok going around about, I think it's the show Succession, but he's talking about a woman's bag and he's like, it's a ludicrously like capacious bag. And the vase itself was like a ludicrously capacious bouquet of flowers. And it made me giggle. I'll send it to you guys. Um,
It's really one of those situations where it's like a flower vase isn't just a flower vase, a flower isn't a flower. It's a reminder. And I think that's kind of how it works in reality if you think of it. So it's like we associate certain objects or images to situations. I think in like specifically this movie, as you mentioned, it was kind of signified a separation, something like impending doom. Whereas I think if, for example, for us, if we were having a bad day and we saw a red car drive by, you wouldn't think anything of it, a red car. But let's say you get into an accident after that, you're just like, okay, that was bad, that was terrible. And then the next day you see another red car and you trip and that makes you angry and you're like, okay, that red car. And then next thing you know, it's just like a series of like unfortunate events keep happening around the red car. And then suddenly a red car has so much meaning to it because you're going to spend the next few weeks looking at red cards and hating them. But I think that's in a way, it's funny because it's hard to hate these images that she shows us. Like they're so beautiful, they're so bright, they're so colorful. And I think that's kind of the part that throws you off because you want to be in love with the film because it's this grand, beautiful love story and it's colorful and bright and it looks happy. So you leave, although confused, like it's a bit confusing because you leave with the feeling of like dissatisfaction, and at the same time, I don't know. I think that movie was really a mixed emotions kind of thing because at the end, I was like, wow, that was amazing, that was beautiful. I hated it. So I
yeah.
think and I think it's great because it's going to be one of those films I'm going to remember for years to come for that reason.
Picture this. You wash the dishes, mop the floors, get on your hands and knees and polish the toilet. You cook him dinner. You pick up the ice he kicked under the refrigerator. You bear his children. You raise his children. And he comes home to tell you he has a mistress. This ever happened to you? If so, call 1-800-GUILLOTINE. We'll offer you a guillotine free of charge because as a woman, we get it. Guillotines come in cherry wood, maple, and pine for the holidays. Call 1-800-GUILLOTINE today. We are not responsible for splinters or legal fees. Essentially, there's like an enticing element to domestication for women, like safety and stability, and of course, love. But I feel like Agnes puts up a warning of how the patriarchy upholds domestication, no matter how much we dress it up. Which it reminds me of that reading we did from Catherine. And she says a quote in her article, and she says, in regard to happiness, she says, the presence of posters everywhere in the film encourages a reading of the diegetic world as cliche and construct. Their world is a bright bubble about to burst, and the various posters and images serve as clues of that. And that's like kind of the firmest quote I can get in regard to how Agnes depicts visual irony before any of the characters even open their mouths. It's painted across the whole film.
But actually, to what you mentioned, I like how you said that the film itself, it's kind of shows the irony before anyone even opens their mouth. I really like, I'm quoting you on that because it's really important to point that out. In the few first minutes of the film, you right away get that. In the opening scene, it's both the married couple, they're seen in this like picturesque forest backyard that they're just having a nice little picnic in, and it's beautiful. And you see them leaving with their family, having a great Sunday afternoon. And as soon as they arrive in their I believe it was his sister's house, you you see in the background on their television that exact moment replicated and displayed on their TV screen, and that it just shows you right away. It's like, oh, that can't be real. Like it's just something in your head goes, nothing that perfect exists without flaws. And I think that's something we can relate to in modern times because in the age of social media, people love to post perfect pictures depicting great moments, but I think it's all a truth that we've learned that that's not reality. Most of those moments that are overly perfect have something else happening behind the scenes, and I think that that's really significant as someone watching it for the first time in our day and age, because I think we're able to pick up on that a lot quicker. So right away when we see that, right away something flickers off in our brain and we're just like, wait, something's not right there. Okay, even though we were just shown this really happy, almost perfect family, something's not right. So it's like we carry on with suspicion as we keep watching the movie and we start to see everything unfold. We're like, ah, there it is. That's the truth. That, and you see the marriage slowly fall apart, but as you mentioned, where it's just like we're forced to think that this is normal, that is happy, that the woman is kind of left behind and the man continues his life, and we're forced to accept it, where it's I mean it's kind of horrible, but yeah, we still see that. And I just really wanted to compare it to how it's like a reflection of modern day I guess just social media influence.
Yeah, I actually really like that you say that because it makes me think. I remember reading that the movie, there was an uproar from women as well. And it almost makes me think that maybe our ability in the digital age, because of social media and because there is a social media like literacy that comes with having social media and partaking in it, that we have like almost like a third eye. So maybe we can identify the wrong or the weirdness, the uncomfortability in the film just before the narrative really takes off, maybe back then they didn't have access to seeing these different things that we have access to. So maybe that was why they misunderstood the film when it first premiered. Not that it wasn't innovative and she did get her coins for it, but it does make me think like maybe we did have a little bit of an upper hand and side-eyeing the film to begin with.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
think
good
there was
point.
definitely a lot more misinterpretation back then.
Mhm.
Because I know I guess it's when we first watched this film in class, I could tell that I think it was the more female population of the class that right away understood everything. As
Mhm.
I mean, they obviously we have a different point of view from a male perspective. And I think it's because, like I said, we've had influence. We have, like you said, we have the ability to see that a little bit more clearly with our third eye. And I think the people who didn't, they would kind of relate to the viewers back then where they were just like, oh no, this actually might be correct. This, this dynamic that we just saw, it's fair game. And I think it's kind of I think it's kind of great to watch that because I would have liked to see that unfold and just look straight in the eye of an audience member that didn't quite catch the message and be like, so you see nothing wrong with this situation. And it's actually kind of crazy that I feel like a lot of women back then might have had trouble kind of grasping the concept as well because I mean, it's not modern times back then. So,
Mhm.
women were used to being I guess treated a certain way, and it's like feminist ideals I guess were not as prevalent as they are now.
Yeah. If I was a woman back then, I would feel like I was in the Twilight Zone. It would be so uncomfortable to get a story like this and everyone's like, what the hell? And you're the one that's like, no, what the hell? Like this is a real problem and no one else agrees with you. That'd be so stressful. Uh,
Yeah, I can imagine that, like having a hard time accepting this film as an idea, and I'm pretty sure the people who did would also get criticized. It's kind of like today when I mean everyone it's we're also in a time where it's like everyone gets
yeah.
criticized for certain tastes or dislikes. But I can imagine this being a very big one back then, especially when women were kind of, told, yeah, you have to be there for your husband no matter what.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. That's infuriating. I can agree with you on that. If I had to live during that time period, I think it would be kind of just, I guess, suffer through it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so stressful. Okay, I wanted to get into a specific new wave modernist technique. I have practiced this word many times, and if I butcher it, don't look at me. Mise en beam, mise en beam. If I say it fast, mise en beam. Um, and this word was in our lecture as well as some of our readings, but I always, since studying film, I always went back to this word or technique in regard to like art, like paintings. And essentially, it is like a subject within a subject or a performance within a performance. And when I look at images online, it literally is paintings of like you holding a mirror up to a mirror and like it gives you a various of mirrors of the same thing, like you go into dressing rooms and there's two mirrors and there's like infinite mirrors going in every direction of the same image.
Kind of like a fun
um
house almost.
yeah, like a fun house. And I was like, well, how does this relate to film? And as I looked at more images, I was like, maybe the subject and within a subject in the movie happiness is are us the spectators in regard to Emily or Teresa. um I thought of it as like cinematic identification. Like we see what she's going through as a woman and we can relate to her as spectators or just female spectators. So I was like, maybe that's our mirror. We are the subject within the subject. But that was just me like maybe over analyzing it and getting too personal within it. So if we're being literal, like in the film where mise on a beam, Jesus Christ,
Mise en
mise on a
abîme.
beam, yeah, happens in the film. I guess like Teresa and Emily, because when Teresa passes, when she takes herself out of the narrative, Emily takes over her role. And they're essentially become the same person, living the same life after Teresa departs us. So the performance within a performance is basically Teresa and Emily together throughout the film and how she takes over her role and the cycle continues over and over and over again, like the mirrors in the fun house or mirrors up to a mirror. I thought that was really interesting And the only way to really understand it again is through images from art. And I couldn't necessarily think of a modern movie that displayed it. So I would honestly say that this is the best movie that encompasses the technique. But I like how she used that, and it made sense. And I think it can apply to cinematic identification with us as spectators to Emily and Teresa, as well as the two women themselves.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that because how you mentioned that it's like that image within an image is Teresa's character and how she's replaced and how that continues. And I think it's even how you see it continue, not even within the film, but outside of it too, because as we can see at the end of the film, it's actually like almost natural to see that situation happen. It's a common occurrence. The family even so easily moves on and accepts his new marriage and the new member of the family. And I think the whole point of that is that we see it reflected in our society today too, where we have so many situations similarly, like where we see ourselves in that. So not only, like you said, are we seeing it within the film, but we're seeing it outside, and it kind of is a back and forth thing where it's reflecting reality. I think we can actually see when a lot of situations like that continue to happen where people are like forced to move on with their lives.
I feel like the discomfort of both women were too much. So there's no way that the film like reinforces his worldview. I mean, even the mistress, Emily, kept talking about like the wife and like what do you mean to me? Like, what are we essentially? And he kept manipulating her out of that. So obviously she was very uncomfortable with the predicament and she wanted something else that he couldn't provide. And then, of course, Teresa, she just takes herself out. That's how uncomfortable she was with what the predicament they were in. So there was a lot of consequences for everyone involved, especially the women that were put in this position. So I think it was more of a critique and doesn't uphold the world, his like worldview of like what a man should get out of women. As ludicrous as the story is, I think it's even more ludicrous that it is fundamentally based on our society. It makes me almost wish that the man, Francois, was like an alien or something, because then we could say that it isn't real and it isn't happening and he's just an alien. But he's a real man, and the issue portrayed in the movie is it mirrors what's happening in our society and what continues to happen. So that's why I think the film was so infuriating and so upsetting, because this is a real thing. And that's all I'll say on that.